Hey everybody, Rich here, South Florida Beekeeping with Rich, and this is as South Florida as it gets. I'm about to tell you a story about a man named O.O. Poppleton, the honey king of Florida. That's Oscar Ogden Poppleton. He was born in Ohio. He moved to Iowa. He enlisted in the Union Army in 1861 as a private. He came out of the Union Army at the end of the war as a first lieutenant, went back to Iowa where he took up beekeeping. And along the way, he got married and had two daughters. But then at the age of 43, for his health, he was told that he needed to go south, young man, go south. And he went south all the way to Miami, which at that point was just a rough and tumble trading post and very little more. The civilized coast of Florida was the west coast of Florida, where you had the estates of Edison and Ford and all these other tycoons. It was the civilized part. The east coast of Florida was very uncivilized then, because this is before Flagler's Railroad came through. You did everything by boat back then. But at any rate, when he came to Florida, he went right back to keeping bees. And he kept bees in what is called the New Idea Hive, what we would today call a long hive. It's also called the Long Idea Hive back then, but we would call it a horizontal hive in today's parlance. It was very popular from like the 1870s through 1900. It was falling out of favor with a lot of people by 1900 because it was good at making extracted honey and cut comb honey, but there was a rage for honey made in those little basswood circles and basswood rectangles and such, and you couldn't sell runny honey, as the Germans call it. You couldn't sell extracted honey hardly at all anymore and such, but these hives apparently were superior at that. He regularly got 110 pounds of honey per hive at a time when beekeepers were satisfied with 50 pounds of honey per hive and considered 80 pounds of honey per hive to be something to be proud of. And he regularly got 110 pounds.
So why is this hive different?
This hive, well, is very different than a Langstroth. The Langstroth, of course, took over because when it came time to start making the honey in those little sections, they called them 1 pound sections, the Langstroth hive was superlative at that. It was of the right size and proportion. You could do it. And if that kind of honey fell out of favor and people wanted something else, the Langstroth hive was easy to pivot to do something else. These were not so much able to do that, and that's for a reason.
So where did you get this hive from?
Out of the trash, dear, of course. In the sense that I was driving along one day and found some true 2-inch thick bald cypress lumber being thrown away. And I went, oh, I know what I want to do with that. I want to make a Poppleton hive because I've been studying them. I made the hive, dear, of course I did. But the hive is easy. The hard part is really the frames, and we're going to get there.
So there's no hinges?
No hinges. You just set it on top. And by the way, when this hive is in operation, there will be a mat rolled out on top of there. You see it? This is a Long Idea hive. When I started beekeeping in about 7 years ago, you could still, from a few of the suppliers, buy what was called a Langstroth jumbo hive. But I don't think you would find anybody today who's still selling the jumbo hive. Now, at the time, 6 or 7 years ago when I started, nobody was selling a jumbo box. A Langstroth jumbo box was a Langstroth box. It was just deeper. Just to show you how these things change. It had gone out of fashion 20 years before, but they kept carrying the frames for it. Well, that's what piqued my interest here. was because that 1914 AI root catalog that I have showed all these different Langstroth frames, including the jumbo, of course, because that was very popular at the time. But it also showed the American frame, which was 12 inches by 12 inches. Okay? Now, I'm going to
Turn it sideways.
turn it sideways.
It's
Here's
not
the thing.
centered.
It is an asymmetrical frame. This was what Poppleton is using. This is all per a visit that he had from an editor of the American Bee Journal in 1914. And he was describing Poppleton and his hives because at that point, this man was providing the largest shipments of honey to New York City that had ever been done. He was moving 15 tons of honey to New York City.
From Miami.
But at that time, he was really probably doing it more from Stewart. Here's the interesting thing. At that time, I mean, he started in Miami, but one of his daughters moved to Miami with him, and she met a guy from Stewart, moved to Stewart, and at some point, Poppleton moved his operations up to Stewart. Didn't much matter to him. Poppleton is credited with being the first truly migratory beekeeper in the United States, because long before the Ford Model T came out, Poppleton was moving large numbers of hives because he had motor launches built to his specifications so that he could load his caskets, this hive, onto a motor launch and tootle it up and down the intercoastal. And he had 5 bee yards between Miami and Stewart on the intercoastal. An American frame is 12 by 12, and so the hives they go into are basically 13 by 13. And you can make them as long as you want. In Poppleton's case, he liked 24 frames. Now, if you look, let's just take a moment and compare that to a Langstroth medium frame. There you go. How do you want to do that? Like that, maybe? Mm-hmm. There's a Langstroth medium frame, and there's a Poppleton frame. I mean, the deep would be about here. All right? A lot of people say that a deep frame is not practical because you roll too many bees. But the guy who was shown how to do it, by the editor of American Bee Journal, who was shown how to do it by Poppleton, found that within half an hour's practice, he could do it just as easily as he could do a Langstroth inspection. So, key thing here is this hive, it would have had its bottom board nailed to it. It would have truly been a casket, and the top would have had shallow sides. It was a telescoping type cover. But that is all that they had for the entrance here. Their instance, they didn't have screen. I'm making some changes here because I've kept both long langs and I've kept top bar hives, and there are certain things that I like. One of the things I never liked about either one of them was having the bottom board affixed to it, because I couldn't tell you how many times I wanted to make an adjustment or a change or had a problem, and I wish I had not nailed them together. So I won't be nailing this together, because if this strange experiment doesn't work out, I want to be able to use this either as a top bar or with a, again, I'll have to make the frames, but I'll use a balanced frame. But I really want to try these off balance frames. I want to get back to that for just a moment. We are going to do an entire video on the construction of the frames, and we'll be going into the whys and wherefores of them a little bit more. But these frames are designed so that the bee space is on one side. Okay, and there's no reason, that is a perfectly legitimate way to do it. The bees will draw their comb along here. So the back side of this is fairly flat, but the back side of this one is the front side of this one. And as you can see, there is a bee space right there. And as long as they go in the right direction, which they have to, you'll have a bee space.
I noticed you have a little cutout on these. Am I getting ahead of you?
The cutout is a necessary, well, apparently necessary part. You'll notice on some of these, they were deeper, and I filled them in some. That basically is as deep as they were supposed to be. the way he used it. But the way he used it was he put a small strip of wood over each one of these. And the way he inspected his hive was to lift off the little pieces of wood to see where the bees had built out to. Uh, I'm just going to go ahead and leave a small slit. As you can see, I filled those in and I made these here because it makes it, this is, of course, a top bar type hive in the sense that the bars fit together.
Yeah.
But with that right there, it makes it a whole lot easier to check and see where things are going rather than having to pull something all the way out. I think that is a really great idea.
I like that idea.
And we're going to try it.
Having said that, why do you think you need the cover over the, you showed a
I'm going to cover that because I do want this completely sealed. I really don't want them being terribly interested in filling this thing up. And just in case there is a gap at some point or other, I want to make sure the bees are kept underneath here. As we well know, every time we give the bees any type of top ventilation down here, they immediately propulse it up. They don't want top ventilation. So his hives would have had a full 1 foot wide piece down here. I'm giving them 6 inches because I'm giving them the strip in the middle here.
Okay, and that's what kind of hardware is that?
That's 1/8 inch hardware cloth.
Okay.
So that nothing get through to them. It's just so useful down here. All my old bottom boards, I drilled 2 1/8 inch holes in and put hardware cloth across them too. It helps with bearding and all that. Not that bearding is an issue on a hive of this nature, because on a hive of this nature, they just go the other side of the follower board and they hang out in the empty space that's not being used otherwise. But just in case.
And is that the only entrance?
That is the only entrance. It's supposed to be the only entrance anyway.
Well,
bees sometimes get clever on us.
If it starts to rot, they'll make their own.
Old pressure treated decking from the old deck.
Nice.
Heavy duty all the way around. As Poppleton said of his hives, the strongest winds won't blow them over. There's a lot of criticism. Oh, these things are ridiculous. They're unwieldy. Poppleton was as tall as I am, 5'3", and he weighed 80 pounds less than I do. And Poppleton managed 500 of these hives by himself. When it came to checking on his bees, when it came to harvesting and all that, he did it by himself. The only time he hired help was when he wanted to move hives from one yard to another. He had wheelbarrows that were built properly for it. And you'll notice there are cleats here. His cleats ran all the way around. He would hire day labor, pick up the hive, put it on the wheelbarrow it to the boat, pick it up, carry it onto the boat, set it in position. Try that with a full hive of honeybees. You can't do it. The people who were saying, oh, they're awkward, not nearly as awkward as trying to pick up a 4 stack of bees without modern equipment. And remember, they had motors, yes, and they had electricity, but they did not have much in the way of infrastructure. They certainly didn't have a lot of hydraulics and equipment like we do now. Well, I was thinking the other day, I was watching the guys, they had a boom arm that came out like that. They had this hydraulic thing that came down. It grabbed the bottom set of handles, and they had a little piece that came down on the top, so you could lift 6 of these up onto the truck at one time. But those weren't even hives. Those were actually just full supers of honey. This hive can be handled that way. The management of this hive is interesting because where you see these burnt tops, that's where the brood hive is going to be, the brood part of the hive. And it's directly, of course, over the air here. And you move this out as they start building frames of honey. And the way Poppleton managed this was he would only harvest the frames from one side at a time, because he had learned that in South Florida, you have a real roller coaster of available nectar. You could come and check one week and they could be bringing in nectar like crazy. The next week there was nothing going on. So he never harvested both sides of his hive at one time. He would harvest one side, and when he came back and checked and this side was full and they were working on this side, he'd take the other side. If they weren't working on this side that he had already extracted, he didn't take the other side. It was a very good design, a very good management method for our South Florida weather conditions.
Well, I do have a question. You burnt the top of the ones that you intend to have as brood frames, but I know you also like to checkerboard sometimes. So are you going to have to eventually just give up the fact that only certain frames have brood in them? Because the bees are going to do whatever they want.
That might happen. Yes, I do like to checkerboard my brood frames. It isn't as necessary on a hive like this, because that's one of the things that he claims, that there was very little swarming on a hive of this nature, because as long as he kept up with changing where the follower board was, and moving it further back, they tended to expand until it was time for them to contract again. So we're going to have to see about all that. This is an experiment. This is living archaeology. I'm going to try this out and try it. I'm going to see how well this does or doesn't work, how much crazy comb they make on me. Oh, and by the way, the ones you're looking at aren't really finished. These are the ones that are finished. Eventually, I contacted AI
so
Root.
we can see the wires.
Oh, you want to see my wires?
Yeah, because we have a swarm. Well, can't really see them in front of that. I think I can see them better here. We have a swarm ready to put in this hive,
right,
but they've already got comb. So in order to put their comb in here, we are going to have to press them onto the wires.
Yep, I want that comb to hang from the top to the bottom. So we're going to be able to put it here, slice off whatever little bit we have to down here, a couple of rubber bands around here, and this should be the fastest bucket transfer you've ever seen. But it's also going to be the biggest bucket transfer you've ever seen. So yeah, I went ahead and made my life live easy by putting these on at this point. But I also have only done this on these, because I was starting to say, I contacted AI Root Company, which you would know is Dedant and as Bee Culture Magazine. Okay. I contacted, because they're all the same. AI Root is the parent company. 6 generations now have been running that private company, and they have Bee Culture Magazine, and they have Dedant, as as a supply house. And I got some information. I could not get direct information on the American frame that they used to sell in their catalog in the first 2 decades of the 20th century and the last 2 decades of the 19th century. But they were able to send me a bunch of patents for what was called the King American hive, and there were some diagrams of the frames, and some of the frames were not asymmetrical. They were centered, but they were top bar and had cutouts like this. But there was one of the patents that actually did demonstrate an asymmetrical frame, which seemed to be what Poppleton was using. Now, the why of that? Well, he was undoubtedly building these things himself with what today would be considered minimal homeowner type equipment, because that's all there would have been. He wouldn't have had the ability to have fancy jigs and routers and things like that. He could do whatever he could do with a table saw. And that's just exactly what I've done. I've done what I could do with a table saw. And it is a whole lot easier, rather than trying to center all of this, to actually make a flat one-sided frame. And so I can't say that that isn't the reason that this happened that way.
And we don't know whether the bees like them or don't.
We don't know.
They liked his.
Yeah. Poppleton was a very good beekeeper. I may not be good enough to manage it right. I don't know. But you know what? If I don't try, I won't know. And this fascinates me. The idea of this narrower beehive and deeper, so that I will get full frames of brood like this in here. We're going to see whether the queen chooses to stay in her 8 frames in the middle, or whether she chooses to start wandering around, because Poppleton never used a queen excluder. And he said he didn't have a whole lot of trouble, but we'll just have to find out.
The other thing I noticed is that these seem to be a lot thicker. Are they thicker than a
No,
Langstroth hive?
Oh, you mean this?
Yeah, walls.
Well, I told you, I found some full 2-inch thick lumber.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people now who are, for the greater insulation value, are making thicker hives. Again, I said, I've had 3/4 inch white pine top bar hives, and I've had 3/4 inch long langs that were 3 feet long and such. I got away from them because I wanted more insulation. So yes, I use this full 2 inch thick lumber here to do that. I found this lumber and like, oh, I want a hive made out of that. If this doesn't work, well, it can be a top bar, or I can make it with a Lazutin type frame that I will size to this. Either one is easy to do, easier than this was to do anyway. We're going to give it a shot.
I know you really like the history. So is there anything else about Poppleton's history that you want to tell us?
One thing in particular, we're due west of Pompano Beach right now, and Poppleton had a queen rearing operation in Pompano Beach that he sold to AI Root in 1915, and AI Root continued to run that queen rearing operation for another 20 years after that. So Anarchy Apiaries isn't the only people who decided that Pompano Beach was the perfect place to put a queen rearing operation.
Okay.
The other thing is that I.E. Crane, I can't speak beyond this, I.E. Crane credits Poppleton with being the inventor of the solar wax melter. And he was much impressed with Poppleton solar wax melters, and Poppleton also made the point that when he thought he had pretty well drained all his comb of as much honey as he could get out of it, he would put the comb in his solar wax extractor, but he would start with honey cans underneath the spout, and that he got as much as a 50-gallon barrel of honey from his cappings when he already thought that he'd pressed them and drained them as much as he could, and he would get another 50 gallons of honey before the wax started dripping out. So yeah, I've said it before that if you have a big wax extractor, you can probably get yourself a fair amount of honey because it's going to melt and run out before the wax does. And that simply confirmed it. I.E. Crane, a editor with, I think he was leanings in bee culture, was very much impressed with his operation. The sad thing is he came to South Florida for his health. But the daughter that stayed back in Iowa took sick in 1917. He went up to help out and see her, got sick himself, and died in October of 1917. He should have stayed in South Florida. He could have been around for a lot more years and enjoyed his retirement, because he retired and sold everything off in 1915. We're going to have some fun. We're going to learn a bit more about beekeeping in South Florida as it was practiced at the turn of the last century. And we'll have more videos coming up on the manufacture of the frames. We'll do videos on the transfer of the swarm into these hives. I'll show you how I'm going to be feeding them, all this sort of thing. This is a journey that we're going to go on together as I try to figure out whether or not this is a viable hive design in South Florida like it seemed to be at the turn of the last century.
I think this is going to be fun.
I certainly hope so. See you later.